Rafael, thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, no problem. It's nice to chat. It's been a long time.
I like to start every interview by asking guests, as a kid, what did you want to be when you grew up?
I wanted to make it to the NBA.
Mm.
So I wanted to play professional basketball. And then after that, I think once it became pretty clear that that was not in my path, I wanted to be a TV broadcaster. I wanted to work for ESPN and cover sports. So those were the
Mm.
two things that as a kid that I dreamed about my career occupation would be.
Well, that connects pretty clearly. Would you mind sharing with the audience what you do and how that connects to wanting to be an NBA player and a TV broadcaster?
Okay, so it's definitely is connected. Didn't make it to the NBA as a player, but in one sense, I did kind of make it to the NBA as a scout. I'm an independent basketball scout. I have a newsletter and a podcast that's covering the NBA draft. And last I looked, maybe a week or two ago, it was number one or number two out of all the NBA draft podcasts out.
Wow.
So it's doing pretty well. Obviously, I want to continue to grow and increase my platform. The broadcasting thing was something I went to college for.
Mm.
Actually started back in high school. I'm from Omaha, Nebraska. There's a program, it was called the Career Center, where we took TV broadcasting courses. And I took it as a sophomore, junior, and senior. So I knew everything about being on TV. I knew how to edit, direct, so on. And by the
Uh,
time I got to college, it was a total repeat of what I had previously learned. So I used to direct the superintendent of Omaha Public Schools. He had a weekly show on public access TV or the school's channel.
ah.
I knew how to do everything because we had to learn the whole aspect of TV
Mm.
broadcasting. So I think I couldn't even like have any classes in my major until my sophomore year. So they're like teaching the other students the basics, like this is the editing board, but I learned everything. And it's almost like taking a course for 4 years, repeating it.
Mm.
I lost interest in it. And I also felt like I couldn't be myself being on TV. I didn't want to have the TV voice, like, hey, this is Rafael Barlowe, and I am here to report. I just felt like it wasn't me. And at that time, I graduated from college in '02. There wasn't as many platforms where you can create your own content. So there wasn't as
Mm.
many outlets. I wish the technology that we have now, I wish we had it then. So I ended up just being away from it, totally far away, not doing anything related to TV broadcasting for a while. And then in 2020, I decided to start my podcast.
Mm.
And during COVID, there wasn't much going on. And I just put out a podcast every single day, sometimes two or three a day. And somebody asked me to be on their show. And then another person heard that and they asked me, did I want to bring my NBA draft podcast to their platform? And ever since then, it's been like fulfilling like my childhood dream on both sides of it. It's like I combined both of them.
Wow. So Rafael and I met when I was in high school.
2004. You were one of the first. Oh, I didn't mean to give out your age. Sorry.
No.
You
I
were
was
one
like,
of the
can't
first
believe you
students.
admit it. No, I was like verifying. Yeah, it was 2004 because I was a junior. So I was in high school at a
Mhm.
magnet high school in Dallas, business focused. And Rafael came in to recruit students for an internship program for minority students.
Yep.
The organization is called INROADS. And I can say that that was one of the pivotal moments in my life. Rafael sold the program. He talked about the benefits, and I got excited, went to do the interviews, and I got my first internship. And then I brought all my friends along with me. You have to join it.
Yeah. What's funny about that? So I just moved to Dallas in June 2004. And when I say I had no plans of moving to Dallas, I was actually on my way to Houston. I think I went to go see the NCAA Final Four, and I stopped in Dallas to visit a family friend, which was Janice, who was my boss and the director of
Oh, I
INROADS
didn't know she was a
Dallas.
family friend.
Yes, I had known Janice for a while, and we were just talking. I hadn't seen her in a few years. I had met her when I was lived in Omaha, so she had moved to Dallas my freshman year of college. And then we were just catching up or whatever. She used to send me care packages my freshman year of school.
Oh,
And then on my way back, she was like, "Hey, I have a job opening. Would you want to come work in Dallas?" And I was thinking like, "No, I don't want to work in Dallas." I think at the time my mind was set on either living in Atlanta or Houston.
so you graduated in 02, and then 04 was when we met. So what were you doing in that time in between?
Trying to figure out life. Actually, I moved to Arizona for a little bit, and then I moved home to Nebraska. And then I had a job, and my plan was to just stay at my parents' house and just save as much money as I could.
Mhm.
And at the time, I wanted to move to Atlanta. And then something ended up happening where Atlanta didn't work out. So I just decided, you know what, I'm gonna try Houston. And I think somebody must have told me they had some friends that knew somebody with the Rockets and the Texans. So sports related. And because it's such a long drive from Omaha to Houston, I stopped in Dallas and I ended up catching up with Janice. And then on my way back, she was just like, hey, did you find a job or something like that? And I was like, no. And she was like, well, I have an opening.
And Janice was the director of the program, right?
For the Dallas office. And when I say it happened so fast, it was literally like we talked about it. And because I knew her, I didn't have to do the whole interview process. And next thing you know, I was on my way to Dallas. And so I remember like I must have got to Dallas on like a Friday. And then she's like, oh yeah, we have this thing called a walkathon tomorrow morning. And I had to figure out.
I remember the walkathons.
Yeah. So I had to figure out how to get to Arlington. And then it just seems like I was just learning a whole new city, a whole new job. And I was the only one on staff that was not an alum. And I remember when Janice was telling me about it when I was in high school, it didn't have anything to do with sports. So I went through the talent pool thing, which talent pool was this group of students that were recruited and you had to dress up and do this whole interview process. I mean, it was a great program, but I had absolutely no interest in it because they didn't have my major. But then two of my friends did it. And then after they graduated from college, they had degrees and jobs waiting on them. I felt like a loser because I graduated. I didn't have anything. Long story short, she tells me, hey, you are in charge of high school recruiting. I was like, okay, that should be easy. And again, I'm from Omaha, Nebraska. I went to college in Mississippi. I knew Dallas was a big city, but she's like, find these students, yada, yada, yada. I do some research and there's 300 high schools in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. So I don't know where to start. And then again, I must have just did some research and I saw that there was a school called Townview. It was a magnet school. It was 4 schools, right? It's the Townview School of Business, Engineering, Nursing, and what was the other one?
So science and engineering, talented and gifted, the law one. I forget what the law one was officially called, but I think there were 6.
Okay. It might have been more because I do remember once reading
Education
USA Today,
too.
and they had all the top high schools in the country. 8 of them or whatever, 6 of them were Townview magnet schools because they each were broken up to a school. So yes, Lupe went to like an elite school. It was the first school that I went to.
And this is a public high school. You have to apply to get in. It's like a whole thing.
Yeah. So here's the funny story about that. It was the first high school that I went to. And I remember I had to do a presentation at like 7:00 in the morning. It was just crazy because it doesn't sound like it was that long ago. But I remember like having to print out a map on MapQuest and you having to look. So again, I don't know the city. And I remember going to this school at like 6:45 and the students were there. They're like sitting Indian style on the floor by their lockers. They're reading books. I start my presentation at 7. My first presentation. I was just like, hey,
that was the very first one.
And I just gave an honest answer. I was like, I wasn't a part of it. All my coworkers were part of it. But my friends that did it, they had jobs. And one of my things that said that was, if I could do it all over again, I would have done the internship because my friends had 3 or 4 years of relevant work experience at 22. And so that was my pitch. And I know my pitch was different than my peers because they talked about their experience in the program. And I remember like all these students signed up. I remember it was you, I think Cindy. There was like 4 people signed up. And then I was like, you know what? I'm not going to these other 299 high schools. I can just go here.
Keep coming this one.
Yeah, I think I did go to a couple schools. And I remember doing a presentation. It was some schools in DISD, Dallas Independent School District. And it was just totally different. I remember doing presentations and asking kids who's going to college next year, who's excited about college. And they're looking at me like, I ain't going to no college. I remember asking kids, what do they want to do? And they tell me they want to be rappers or they were going to just work in a family body shop or something like that. So I realized it was totally different. I realized just depending on where you live at in the city, the goals are totally different. So I ended up just coming back to Townview often. And that's how we met. You were a great intern. And it's just awesome for me to see like the first group of students that I recruited. It made me look great. I'll just be honest. It made me look like I knew what I was doing. I was this elite recruiter. I mastered the system right away. But it was honestly, it was just pure coincidence that I chose Townview first as my first school, and the students were so motivated and bright. It was life-changing for me, honestly.
Thank you for sharing that. I didn't realize this was your first recruiting event. I wouldn't have known because you shared it so beautifully from what I can remember. I was so convinced, and I remember telling my friends about it. And then the next year, getting more people in, like, okay,
Yeah.
you have to go do this. It's a great opportunity.
And I think my story was more like, don't be like me. Like, and I think it resonated with a lot of people because I didn't have the story like your story. You interned, and once you graduated from college, you had all this experience. I wish I could do it. It resonated with students. And so again, it just made me look like I was a genius in a sense.
Okay, walk us through, how did you go from the inroads role to today? So that's a big jump. You're recruiting high
Yeah.
school students into these internships, which is,
Mhm.
at least from my perspective as a student, huge impact. And so how did you get to doing what you do today? Because that's so cool. And it's a big pivot, a big transition.
Honestly, that inroads experience for me made me feel like I can apply for a job anywhere. Because even though I was
Mm,
teaching the interns how to dress, but my first time going through it, it was a learning experience because I
mm.
knew what to wear for job interviews. I knew how to have a tight resume.
You knew that
Uh,
before starting inroads, or you learned
no,
it?
I didn't. Like I was really learning on the fly.
Mm.
But after interviewing hundreds of students every year, you start to realize like, okay, these are the type of answers that will not get you higher, or this is the look. So I was really learning on the fly, which I don't think many people knew that.
Just for the audience to know, so inroads is a program that provided training. So companies hired inroads to recruit minority students to come into their companies. So my company and my accounting firm, tons of big companies. And as a part of that, on Saturdays in the summer, there would be summer internships. We'd receive professional development training. So how to dress business professional, business casual, resume, how to network. And these are like Saturday all day events. And I loved
Yeah.
them. I thought they were so much fun.
Oh, wow. Well, I'm
Some
glad
people
to hear
did it.
that.
Some people did it. I loved it. Thought it was great. It was a place to connect and network with each other and
Mhm.
then learn the things we didn't know. So it was a great program.
Yeah. And the one thing I will say I didn't get from it is the networking. I'm a terrible networker, which is interesting because the sports world, it may work in my favor because I have some really important people in like my phone, but I'm just bad at reaching out to them. And then it turns into
Mm,
like, this guy's not asking for anything. It's weird how it's total opposite in sports. I remember those
hmm.
Saturdays and think about how long they were for you. We had to be there an hour early and stay an hour later. And it was tough because as an intern, you're in your early 20s and you probably want to go out on Friday night and so on, but you have to be up early and wear these business clothes and so on. But again, like I said, I was really learning on the fly. And I'd say over my 4.5 years there, I probably had 400 different interns. So I'm
Mm.
learning from 400 different peoples. I'm learning how to manage personalities. I'm learning everybody's background is different. Like I said, it was a great learning experience. I always wanted to work in sports. And then I looked up and 4 years went by. I was not doing what I really wanted to do. And then I like bought a house when I was 25. I was like a slave to my possession. I knew that
Mm.
in sports I'd have to start all over from
Mm.
scratch and intern. But after buying a house, I just felt like I couldn't do it.
Mm.
And then what was interesting for me was that I had a nice late model car. So there was an opportunity. It was a team called the Fort Worth Flyers. It was a minor league team in Fort Worth, and the actual general manager of the Dallas Mavericks, who I
Mm.
had ended up building a relationship with, he asked me would I be interested, open
How'd
to
you
work.
build a relationship with him? Like, how'd you meet him?
Close
Because that
kind of
sounds
helped
like
me.
networking.
So this is how that kind of helped me. So one day, the Dallas Mavericks had like an open scrimmage at TCU. It was on a Saturday, and I just wore what I used to wear to the Inroads events on Saturdays. I had on a suit again. It's just crazy to me thinking about it now, but I had on a suit and I had my portfolio. Remember, we used to carry portfolios,
Hmm. I
and it
had
was
my nice leather portfolio.
but it was the stuff like that I actually learned from Inroads. Just think about like your peers that didn't go through Inroads. They had to learn all that professional stuff after college. So I learned it after college, but I was actually like
A
teaching it.
professional.
But I was teaching it. I had a great boss who made sure that she walked me through the process. So I go to this open scrimmage with my portfolio and my resume. So I end up seeing the general manager, randomly seeing him And I used to call his phone all the time. I used to call
Wait,
like
why? How did you call his phone? How did you have
I,
his number?
I didn't have his cell phone number. I just
Oh,
called the office because I
oh,
wanted to get involved in sports
gotcha,
and intern
gotcha,
and so
gotcha.
on. And I would always end up talking to his assistant. I ended up seeing him, and I don't even know what prompted me to even bring my resume, but I brought it. So you can imagine I stood out. It's a Saturday, and I dressed up. So I introduced myself, and then I said my name, and he's like, "Oh yeah." I mean, obviously my name stood out because it's probably
You're
on
the
his.
guy who's called 100
Yeah.
times.
So he says to me, "Okay, nice to meet you." He says, "Do you have a resume or anything like that?" And it's like, "Sure do."
Wow.
So I give him my resume, and he's like, "Okay, we'll be in touch." So I'm excited. So I'm thinking like, "Oh, I'm about to quit inroads. I'm out of here." And nothing happened. And then one day, I want to say like 6 months later, he randomly called me and was
Hmm.
asking me, could I come to the office to answer phones around the trade deadline? And if you're not a sports fan, the trade deadline is like maybe around the halfway point of the NBA season where teams can make trades. It's the last
Okay.
day where they can make different trades to either upgrade their roster or try to cut salaries. So this is '04. So not everybody had a cell phone like that then. So he just needed someone to come in and answer phones around lunchtime. So I asked my boss, could I do it? And luckily we had a personal relationship. She knew me and she
She
knew
knew
what my
this was your
passion
dream.
was.
Yeah.
And so she said, yeah. And so I called him back and I never heard from him again. I didn't hear from him. So anyway, long story short, time goes on. And then Janice ended up leaving INROADS. They did some restructuring and then
Hmm.
she didn't get this regional job. And then I think somebody else quit. And I just remember one summer, believe it or not, I think I was supposed to have 40 interns. One summer, something happened where I had 150
Oh
interns.
my God.
And I just remember having all those interns. I even had interns that weren't mine, that didn't necessarily talk to their whatever our titles were. We had different interns we were responsible for, but I had some that I may have recruited out of high school, whatever, that just felt more comfortable talking to
Mm.
me. And they ended up being my intern indirectly. So I just remember just being overwhelmed.
Mm.
And then when it came time for a raise, I didn't get the raise. And I just felt so disrespected. I just felt
Mm.
like it's stuff that I'm doing behind the scenes with interns that they're going to drop out of school. I'm talking them into staying in school. I mean, it was just some people just had some really personal stuff and they just felt comfortable telling me about it. And of course, I'm not like telling my boss the different stories. And so, long story short, I just felt disrespected. I just made a knee jerk reaction and was like, okay, I'm going to apply for other jobs. And I applied for another job and I got it. And then I quit INROADS. And then 6 weeks after I got hired, I got laid off.
Wow.
So they laid me off, and the company, it was actually a terrible job. So I hated it.
It was
It
a
was,
blessing.
yeah, but it was a job. It was more so like a knee jerk reaction. I just wanted to get out. So and this job was recruiting, but it was like recruiting cell phone tower engineers. It wasn't the same as like with the interns where I was only like a few years older than most of my
Mm.
interns anyway. I didn't have the same personal relationship,
Mm.
like call some of my guy interns and make fun of them if their football team lost that weekend or so on. I just felt like I just had a great relationship with my interns.
Mm.
And I mean, I still keep up with some to this day. So anyway, I get laid off after 6 weeks. And then that's when I was like, all right, the workforce is unstable.
Mm.
If the workforce is going to be unstable, I might as well be unstable pursuing my
Mm.
dream and my passion of working in sports. And went from there, trying to tell the condensed version. The company was nice enough. I think they paid me a severance package, even though I was
Oh,
only there for
nice.
6 weeks.
Wow.
How they worded it to me was, you had a job that you were at for 4.5 years. We recruited you. We misbudgeted. So we
Mm.
feel bad that you left a job that you were at. So here we're going to pay you for the next 2 months or whatever. I was like, oh my gosh,
I made it.
this is free money. So I ended up going to LA. I actually went to Phoenix for like NBA All-Star weekend, hoping to network and meet somebody. And then from there, I was like, well, let me go visit some friends in LA. So I drove, and it's a long drive from
Mm.
Dallas to Phoenix and then Phoenix to LA. And I ended up staying in LA for 18 months.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I ended up staying for 18 months. And what I learned about LA was everyone is there to pursue a dream, whether it's acting or the film industry or being a model, whatever. And people don't necessarily care how they look in the process. On the
Mm.
outside looking in, when you see Hollywood, you see the glitz and the glamour, but LA is a difficult living. I mean, it was
Mm.
weird for me seeing how people had like 5 roommates and
Mm.
people lived in vans and people
Mm.
worked so many different odd jobs so that they could be available just in case a casting call came. So you didn't have a regular job. You worked at nighttime as a bartender, or you just found creative ways to make money. So that way you were always free and available for the next casting call. And I just remember it's a totally different mindset than in Dallas. I'm sure you can probably relate in the sense, once you graduate, there's keeping up with the Joneses in a sense. Like, all right, I need to move into this newer model apartment, or I got to get this late model car, or my friends are buying houses, so it's time for me to buy a house. And so it's just like you're keeping up. And I felt like in LA, it was such a huge transplant city that people were coming from all over. Yes, there is keeping up with the Joneses, but it seems like it's so far away because everybody's just trying to survive and scramble up enough money so they don't go home like, oh, I came out here to model. So nobody wants to say I went to LA to be a model, then you move back to Minnesota. You didn't make it. So anyway, that taught me about just going backwards to go forward.
And what were you doing in those 18 months?
So the 18 months, I had unemployment. So I was milking that. I had went to a church and the pastor was from New York and he was scared to drive. He didn't drive. He didn't know how to drive. And so he would offer to pay me to just be his personal driver, drive him to church, drive him to different meetings. And then he was a single pastor. And so at the time he was like, as a single male pastor, if I have to meet with one of the women in the church, I don't want to meet with her one-on-one because it looks like anybody could say, oh, that's pastor. He's on a date. He's dating the women. So he would be like, can you just come with me? So it looks like it's not a one-on-one meeting or I'm out on a date. And then I was in charge of the media ministry at the church. So printing out like the DVDs and selling the DVD copies or T-shirts or whatever. So that was one form of income. I would do extra stuff on movie sets, like hold the boom mic for hours or operate the camera. I just had to get creative. If I could make $500 here, $500 there. It was tough because I had a house in Dallas that I ended up losing during the first wave when everybody lost their home and they had the mortgage crisis in like 08 or whatever. And so that's why I was able to go to Arizona just like, because my house I lost it. But living in LA, it was just like, man, my apartment, which is old, it costs more than my house, which is new. And like living in Dallas, you just kind of get used to certain amenities and so on. So I would always be like looking at Dallas stuff or like what my friends were doing in Dallas. And then finally I was like, okay, you know what? I'm going to come back home to Dallas. I guess Dallas is technically my home, even though I'm not from here. So on my way back, and this is where my story gets really interesting. I ended up getting a class action lawsuit from when I lost my home because I was in the first wave of people to lose my home. And actually, Countrywide Home Loans was one of our sponsoring companies at INROADS. And it was my company where I sourced interns to. They ended up going out of business. They were kind of like the leader in the whole fraud crisis or whatever. So I ended up getting a class action lawsuit. It wasn't a whole lot of money, but it was enough money to put down on a place in Dallas. And right when I put the money down, and I was actually here in Dallas, but my stuff was still in LA, I got this call from the pastor of the church. And he says, hey, I know you were talking about moving back, but man, we at the church, man, we love you. You've just been great. There's a member at the church whose best friend works for the Clippers, LA Clippers, and we got a job for you. So I'm like, okay, I just moved back. And they were like, well, just give it some thought. So I ended up talking to the lady and she's like, look, it's an internship, it's unpaid, but I can make sure that I can get you in the door and you'll be working for the Clippers soon. So of course, in my mind, as someone that used to manage interns, I'm like, I know how to be an intern. This is going to be easy. So this is where it gets really crazy. So I was paying money for the place in Dallas. I couldn't afford to pay money for the place in LA. So I know I'm about to get evicted, but I feel like, all right, I got this amazing opportunity with the Clippers. I end up meeting the lady and she tells me it's unpaid, which I'm like, okay, then this is bad. And also you have to do it for class credit. So at the time I'm 30 years old. I've been out of college 8 years. I had an amazing job at INROADS where I was helping people prepare for their future. So now I got to go to college again. So I ended up taking a PE class at this community college.
So it could count as a class credit.
Class credit. So I'm in there like, all right, I'm just going to play kickball an hour or shoot around. It was literally like high school PE, but at a community college.
Yeah.
And so I had to have the paperwork. And I remember asking the the teacher. It's like, hey, I got this internship. I have to do it for class credit. Can you sign this paperwork? And he tells me, no.
Oh no.
And he's like, because once I sign it, you're never going to come back. And I said, well, no, I promise I need it. I'm supposed to have it for the first day. And he's like, no, he says, maybe 10 classes. But I'm like, after 10 classes, I was supposed to have it on my first day. He's just like, well, I don't know you, but what are the chances of you coming back after I sign the paperwork? He keeps telling me no. And then after my second or third day at the internship, I'm the only one that hasn't brought in the proper paperwork. Again, I'm trying to intern. I don't have a job and I got to go to school. And then LA is kind of like Dallas, but worse as far as traffic. So you could be in traffic, depending on how far you live, which just kind of like shortens your day. On my fourth day, I'm thinking I'm going to get up, I'm going to beg him and just let him know that I'm in jeopardy of losing this internship. And on my way to try to beg him, the engine in my car just went out, completely out. So I never make it to get my paperwork signed, and I get fired from the Clippers because I didn't show up to work on my fourth day and I didn't have my paperwork. So I'm devastated. I'm just like, is this a sign? This is not for me or whatever. And then I got evicted. So,
oh my God.
So I got evicted. I think I got evicted the day before. So I spent the night at a friend's couch. So within a matter of 24 to 48 hours, I get evicted. I lose the internship and my car breaks down. And because it was a fairly expensive car, and I remember taking it to the dealership and they're like, oh yeah, it's just a new engine, to be like $22,000. So I don't have that. I end up just kind of moving back to Dallas, all my belongings shipped in a broken car. So I ended up moving into the house that I was paying for, but my brother and his wife and their daughter were living there just to try to help me out. So now we all have to stay together. And a pivotal moment for me was that could have been like my time to quit. And I ended up calling the Dallas Mavericks. I knew they had just started a new minor league team in Frisco, which is 5 to 10 minutes where I was living. And I said, I want to work there. And they were like, well, it's an unpaid internship. All right, here we go again. So again, I'm 30 years old. So I ended up taking the internship. I don't know why I didn't give up. I don't know why. I just felt like I could make it work. But then there's a part of me, and maybe it's a little bit of arrogance, that felt like I know how to be an intern. I know how to be impressive. I know how to basically beat out these other 19, 20, 22-year-old interns because of my experience.
Well, I want to stop you there, Rafael. The moment where you're evicted, the moment where your car breaks down and you don't get that piece of paper, and you get fired from the LA Clippers, which is like something you really were excited about. And that would have broken most people.
It was devastating. I just remember feeling like, why me? And I remember I used to listen to a rapper named Joe Budden a lot. And most rappers were rapping about how much money they had and the cars and all that. He was always rapping about real life stuff that was going on and how he was trying to make it in the industry. I remember he had a line in a song where he was talking about, in my eyes, the prize is being dangled, but I can't grab at it because my pride is getting strangled. And that's how I felt like the prize was this internship or this job in sports, and it was within my reach and I couldn't grab at it. And so I just remember listening.
Do you still remember the lyric?
Yeah. Because I used to just listen to the song over and over again, because even though we were in two different industries, he always told the story of how he was just trying to make it in this rap industry, but he was different than everybody else. He wasn't rapping about the cars and the jewelry and all that. And so I just used to listen to it all the time. And then I remember there was another line that he said, and I really related to it. He says, sometimes when you shoot for the stars, your gun jams. And that's how I felt. I felt like I was shooting for this dream job and I couldn't shoot it because my gun was jammed. Wow. Life would have been much easier if I just continued the path that I was on in Dallas. I could have climbed up the corporate ladder. So I was devastated. And even to this day, I'm still amazed that I just decided to keep going.
Yeah, and you could have let your pride strangle you. You could have said, no, this is it. I need to go back to corporate, but you didn't.
Yeah, I remember the last job that I had. I didn't feel this way about INROADS all the time, but that last job that I had for 6 weeks, I just remember hating getting up in the morning and going to work. I'm a big sports guy. So I remember having to break the day down into like 4 quarters. Like, all right, 8 to 10 is the first quarter. All right, I made it through the first quarter. 10 to 12. At 12 o'clock is halftime. And I just remember like always looking at the
Wow.
clock and feeling like only 7 minutes went by. I just remember that feeling of, I can't do this. I don't like this. And then I just was kind of spoiled by INROADS because we had so much flexibility and freedom with INROADS. If I had to go meet with some students, I could meet with them. And I just had so much freedom. We didn't necessarily have someone micromanaging us. And that's why I thought Janice was a great boss, because she just let all of us work to our strengths. And I knew I wouldn't be able to find that at another job. I mean, we didn't have to dress up to go into the office, but we had to dress up. Now, when we had to dress all the way up. And so I just knew that I wouldn't find that. And then I just felt like, man, there's got to be more to life than just going to a job that you absolutely hate. And I didn't want to be that person that's like, I can't wait till Friday night and I hate Monday mornings. And you used to hear about that as a kid, or people, you see adults, that's their life, and you never think it's you. It was a small period of time, but it's just for 6 weeks. I just absolutely hated going to work. When my alarm clock went off, it was just like, I hate this. And I knew I didn't want to do that again. And so I just figured I got to make this sports thing work. I have to, because that might be my life going forward if I don't make it work.
Okay, so you get the Dallas Mavericks internship. What happens then? With the
G League team, yeah.
G League team.
So this is where my INROADS experience came in handy. I'm doing all the grunt work. I'm driving a team van. I'm washing uniforms. I'm picking players up from the airport. I'm doing all of this stuff just in exchange for access and learning how things work. And because it was a brand new team, everybody had multiple roles. It was like the NBA team may have 100 people doing these jobs, while the G League team may have 7. So it was so many different skill sets that I could possibly run. I mean, it was a great experience. And so I remember they had all these interns that were coming in, and they were just disappointed with their experience because they're college students. They may go to UTA, they're driving all the way up to Frisco, and they're only doing grunt work. They're not getting any relevant experience. And so this is where INROADS came in. So I tell the president of the team, say, hey, look, I know I'm an intern. I said, I'm older than all your interns. I've got experience. Because he kept wondering, am I going to quit? Because he saw my resume compared to everybody else's. And he just thought, you're going to quit. This is beneath you. By the way, I'm working at a gas station graveyard shift overnight.
I was going to ask you, how are you supporting yourself?
Yeah. I was working at a gas station graveyard shift, and then I bought a moped. So that was my transportation.
Because you lived close enough to drive.
Yeah, it's like 3 miles. I tell him, I say, look, if you give me a business card and a desk and an email address, I will run your internship program. I said, now the other interns don't need to know that I'm an intern, but I will at least look official, even though I'm not getting paid, and I'll take it off your hands as far as trying to manage these interns. He's like, really? You do that? I said, yes, I got the experience. But I said, one of the things that we're going to have to do is, you're always complaining about you don't have enough interns. I said, everybody's applying, but what kid is going to drive 20 miles on a school night? He thinking he's getting relevant experience. He doesn't meet anybody in the organization. And all you're telling him to do is, hey, can you set up the arena? Can you put the flyers on the seats? I said, these college kids can't afford that, especially if they're coming from UNT or UTA, 30 miles, whatever. Interns want relevant experience. So I said, what I'll do is I'll create a cycle. Okay, yes, they're going to have to do those jobs, but if the guy wants to be a broadcaster, then maybe every other game he sits next to the broadcaster. I said, if a person wants to be a coach, then if they do all the grunt work, but maybe they can cut up some film and send it to the coach. So they were like, this is genius. And of course, it took the pressure off of them, but then interns were more motivated to come. And actually, some of those interns are still working for the team now. Wow. So I just kind of created a system. But after doing it for a couple of years and all that, I realized, why would they pay me if I keep doing it for free?
So those 2 years you weren't paid?
No, I wasn't paid. So I ended up coaching youth basketball. So I leveraged my affiliation with the Legends and the Mavericks to coaching youth basketball. So I had 5 teams, and I coached the kids on the weekends, and I charged their parents maybe $100 a month to be part of my team or whatever. And I always wore Mavericks or Legends clothes and all that. By the time I got 40 something kids, it's able to sustain for a little while.
Well, what's coming up for me, Rafael, is that you're being really resourceful throughout all that. You saw an opportunity. You're like, okay, how can I leverage my experience at INROADS to make this program better? And then you said, okay, so I'm doing this for free, but how can I leverage my affiliation to create a side hustle so I can continue doing this? So
Yep.
you're looking for possibilities. You
Yep.
didn't just go wash the uniforms and put the papers on the seats and think, oh, this sucks, right?
Yeah, or this is going to get me noticed. Again, this is where my experience with inroads and me being 8 to 10 years older than the other interns, it gave me a huge advantage. And also, like I said, with inroads, I had hundreds of interns and hundreds of different personalities and students that I
Mm,
worked with. Well, now at 30, some of the players are the age of my former interns, or they're maybe
mm,
24, 25. So not only can I relate to them, I can have different conversations with them. It was just easy for me to build a relationship and kind of bridge the gap between the player, and I'll just be honest, the 25-year-old Black player and the 60-year-old white general manager. They come from
mm,
totally different worlds, but I felt like I kind of
mhm,
had the balance of both.
mm,
And so I ended up developing really strong relationships with players. Then it got to the point where I felt my relationships with players was being like taken advantage of. And so I remember one kind of like a horror story. This guy got traded. And that was my first time learning how the business works. This team just came from a road trip and they traded him and they had housing for the players. And he had to get out of the apartment within like an hour so they could have it cleaned up for the new player.
wow.
So I just remember thinking, wow, that's pretty harsh. In the business world, I would never fire an intern. I just
Mm,
remember having to tell the guy, and he wasn't mad at me, even though I kind of represented the team. But it was
mm,
really awkward because it was like he just gets back at his apartment, like, hey,
mm.
you just
Oh,
got traded.
oh,
I just remember having this conversation. Hey, you just got traded. It's like 8 o'clock in the morning. Your flight leaves at 5. So you got to pack your stuff up. I heard that you have an aunt that lives in Duncanville.
oh my
So
God.
I'm going to drop you off at your aunt's house and give you some money so your aunt can take you to the airport so you can go report to your new team. That was an eye-opening experience, but I'm glad that I had the, I guess, people skills to make that situation as good as it could possibly be. So anyway, I ended up developing relationships with different players and then wanted to get back into storytelling. I met this guy. He was a former NBA player. He was the guy that was a really big star in college. And then he was really embarrassed at the fact that he wasn't in the NBA anymore. And
Mm,
I just saw how hard he worked. So this was interesting to me because I remember seeing him on TV and all that. And then now I see him every day, and he's just a really normal guy. He just had a baby. He's going to the grocery store, doing this and all that. And I remember, I want to document
mm,
your story. And he was like,
mm,
nah, it's too embarrassing. And I was like, no. I said, I mean, I went to school for TV stuff. And I used to have a massive sneaker collection. So I ended up selling my sneakers and exchanging it for camera equipment. And so I was like, yeah, man, I want to tell your story and
mm,
so on. And he's like, okay, cool. Actually, you know what? I'm going to go back. This is a pivotal moment. I'm going to go back. So I started thinking about doing TV stuff, like filming with my camera, just
mm,
polishing the old
mm,
skills that I had from high school. So I'm thinking about doing that. And then there's a guy that was training NBA players, and a couple of them played for the Mavericks at the time, Josh Howard, Devin Harris. I asked him, I said, hey, can I film your workout? And he said, sure. So again, this is 2012, before everybody had a camera. And I remember filming it on my iPad. I filmed it on my iPad. And after it was over, the guy says, hey, do you have any video of Josh dunking? So Josh is Josh Howard, who was a former All-Star. He tore his knee up and then he was trying to get back and get healthy.
mm.
So they asked me, did I have any video of him dunking and jumping off his surgically repaired knee? So I said, yeah. So I cut up the film and I thought, if I'm an NBA general manager, which is my dream job, what do I want to see out of a player that is injured? So again, this is 2012. Usually you would have to fly a guy in, see him work out in person to determine if he's
Mm.
really healthy. So I sent the video back to the trainer. And then Josh's manager calls me and he's screaming. He's like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna take care of you. Oh, and he's just excited. So I'm thinking, okay, I did something good. I'm feeling good. Okay. So the next day, one of my friends from college calls me. He's like, is there another Rafael Barlowe in the world? No, I don't think so. He says, did you film a video? And I'm like, how did you know? He's like, it's in the Washington Post. And so one of my very first
Like
videos,
online?
yeah, it was
Or
online. And the whole video was in the Washington Post. And Josh's PR team reached out to this writer and told him to write an article about Josh being healthy. And then Josh's people paid me. I met them and they gave me some money. And I thought about it, wait a minute,
you were like, that was easy.
I can do this. So then I started doing video stuff. And then I remember there was a team that was going to China. And I went and I was filming on my iPad the practices because I wanted to learn the plays and all of that. So I was very much like a sponge trying to soak in as much knowledge. And then the guy that was putting the team together, he says, do you want to go to China? I said,
Oh my God.
sure. It won't cost you anything. He says, I can't pay you, but it's a free trip. You'll be gone for 18 days. And I just would like for you to film. And I didn't have a passport. And so he says, look, if you want to do anything in this basketball world, you need to get a passport because it's a global game. So the next year, the opportunity comes up.
So you didn't get to go
I didn't get to go.
because you didn't have a
I
passport.
didn't have a passport. So the next year when the opportunity came up, he called me. He's like, do you have a passport? And I said, I do. You want to go to China for 3 weeks and film? So I went to film. And then that's when it clicked. All right, I can travel the world for free if I'm good with the camera. My first international trip was China for 3 weeks. Everything else is easy after that. You really can't get any further. Back to the player that I was trying to film, and I wanted to tell his story about how he's trying to make it back to the NBA. And then one day he took me up on the offer. He says, look, we just can let the camera roll. Follow me when I work out in the morning, when I do this, when I'm going to the store, around my family, when I'm getting a haircut, and so on. So start filming. And then he asked me would I be his trainer? And I said, yeah. So now I'm his trainer and his videographer. He was actually playing for the Legends. And then one year he said, hey, look, this is what's going to happen. I'm going to play well. I'm going to get the call up to the NBA. And whatever team picks me up, you're going to come live with me. And we're going to continue filming, telling the story, and we're going to train.
Wow.
So that was one of my biggest breaks. And now I'm in the NBA circles. Other players are like, oh, yeah, I know him through him. And I always tell people, if you want to work around NBA players, the first thing you have to do is never ask for anything. They're used to everybody asking for free tickets, free shoes, money, which they have all of those resources. I never would ask for anything. And I never was like taking pictures, selfies. And I always acted like I belong. And so that kind of helped my credibility. And then from there, it just turns into different opportunities. And to make a long story short, I can say that I've been to 23 countries and I've never paid for one.
Wow. That's an incredible story, Rafael. It's so cool. What's standing out to me is you didn't give up.
Yeah. Oh, there were times. I'll be honest. There was one time I prayed, take this vision away from me. I remember being 37 years old, no money in my account. 37 is not young and it's not old, but you're supposed to have different things. And then I would see my interns buying houses and they're getting married. And I just remember not having anything. I remember not having a car and taking the bus. And Dallas does not have the best transit system. So to go from here to downtown in a car, where I live in Plano to downtown in a car, maybe 20 minutes, but on the bus, it's like 3 hours. And just trying to take a bus to go make $50. And I mean, there was just some times where I just like, it's not happening for me. I would get a break, then a setback, a break, then a setback. And there was at one point where I just was like, I don't know if this is happening, but then I would try to apply for jobs. And I remember one time I applied for a job and the guy from INROADS. So my suit is nice. I got my portfolio, and no offense to people, but I remember looking at the people that came into the interview before me, looking at them, thinking like, why am I here? They don't have on suits. They're not dressed professionally. And the guy interviewed me. He says, look, I'm not going to hire you. He says, you don't want this job. You just need some ends. You're just trying to make ends meet. I would be doing you a disservice if I hire you. And I'm like, no, I mean, I've been self-employed for a while. I want to apply what I've learned over the years to your company. I think I'd be a good fit. And he's just like, no. He says, as soon as what you really want to do comes back up, you're going to quit. He was so honest. I really want to hire somebody that doesn't have the same options. I'm like, dang it, man, I really need that job. But I guess he just saw it. He just saw something in me that was different. And so I just had to keep trucking. And I would say the biggest break, or one of them, was I got asked to film a trip in France, in Paris, and I had absolutely no money, not a penny in my pocket. It was a free trip. So I went to Paris. I had tweeted, man, I want to live overseas. I don't want to be a tourist. I want to be immersed in the culture. Just tweet it out. 10 minutes later, I get a call from an NBA agent, and he asked me, was I serious? And I said, yeah. He says, no, you would really live overseas. And I said, I would love to. I would love the experience. And I'm talking. He's like, all right, I might have something for you. So this is, I'll never forget, it's May 5th, 2016. On September 25th, 2016, I got a job living in Istanbul, Turkey. It was paying me more money than I had ever made before. And my job was to document a player that was living there that wanted to document his experience playing in Turkey and his goal to win a championship. And I did it. I lived over there, and I was going to Madrid and Barcelona, and I went to Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. I went all these different places. And that was probably one of the most memorable years of my life because it felt like the journey started. Yeah, the journey started in 2010. And 6 years later, I was living in a different country. And all I was doing was filming and documenting the story and learning so much about basketball in Europe. And like I said, just going to different places. I've always loved geography that I only imagined about, and I was getting paid to do it. And so.
And you had your passport?
I had my passport, and I've got a unique story. So.
That's incredible, Rafael. And thank you for sharing. That was very generous of you to share that you had your little points, that it wasn't all just up, 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 up. Right.
No, it was a break, setback, break, big setback. I mean, I tell people I've been evicted. I've had cars repossessed. I've pretty much had every experience that you can think of on this journey. And for me, it was like, I know I could go back and get a job. I mean, I know all the companies that I used to do work with at INROADS. I still had some of those contacts. I know it was easy for me to go back and just kind of climbed the corporate path. But for whatever reason, I just felt like I really want to do what I enjoy doing. I really want to wake up and it doesn't feel like work. And so now I don't have a weekend. I don't know the difference between Saturday and Wednesday. If you give me $10 billion right now, I'm still going to do the same job. So I'm just glad that I just stuck with it.
Well, and on your LinkedIn profile, you said something like worked a day in the last, I don't know how many years, because you love your job so much.
It's true. I mean, it is work. I do a podcast 5 days a week. I have a newsletter that I try to write 3 days a week. So I don't get a lot of sleep. I think I went to bed last night at like 1. And then there's a kid that I'm doing some skills training with, and we work out at 7. Yeah, I don't get a lot of sleep. And there are days where I'm just like, man, this is overwhelming. And then I got a son that just turned 1, and I've been married a year and a half. So now I have the same hard work that it took for me to get here, but now I'm trying to still work like that, but also try to be a good husband and a good father. So there are times where it gets tough, but it's easy because I'm doing what I enjoy doing.
Rafael, how can people learn more about you? How can people follow along? Tell us all the things.
Yeah, so I'm on Twitter, Barlowe, Barlowe 500. And I'm on Facebook, Rafael Barlowe, Rafael Barlowe. I have a podcast, and it's also on YouTube, NBA Big Board. So if you just type in NBA Big Board or my name, it'll come up. And then I have a newsletter that I think most of the NBA teams, if not all of them, subscribe to. It's like either $7 a month or $50 for the year. And it's just me covering the draft. And I actually did one article where I told my journey and I tried to condense it into a story form. It did pretty well as far as like just people subscribing. So maybe one day, once I get to where I want to get to, I'll write a book. But I really think my journey is to help other people that want to get in sports to know that it's not easy unless somebody creates an opportunity for you. But for the most part, a door is not going to open. You just got to kick it down. And you have to just understand that it's a marathon, not a sprint. And most people want to work in sports, but they don't get to where they want to get to because they just don't have the time or the patience to wait it out. And I'm just really, really thankful that I was just patient and waited it out. I've had some amazing experiences that I wouldn't be able to have if I just took the traditional route.
Thank you for being here. If there's someone listening who's sitting at their desk Kind of like you were those 6 weeks
Oh my
hating,
gosh.
hating it. Maybe they don't hate it. Maybe it's just like,
Mhm.
it's fine, but I don't wake up excited. What would you say to that person listening?
The first thing I would say, if it's your passion and if you're not working in your passion, it's going to pull at you. It's going to bother you. You're not going to be able to avoid it. You can try. I know there was at one point where I was like, I just want to stay away. I just want to make money, but
Mm,
I just couldn't get away from it. Even when I tried to give up and find jobs, I couldn't
mm,
get away from it. So I would say trust your gut. If your gut is saying this is not where you're supposed to be, or you're not operating in your passion, then you got to operate in your passion. I just think if God gave you this talent to be like this motivational speaker,
mm.
and you have $1 million talent, but you have a job that's paying you $100,000 a year, because you're not trusting your gut or fulfilling your purpose, you're missing out on $900,000. It's not easy, nothing is, but if your passion is pulling on you, then you got to pursue it.
Mm. Thank you, Rafael. Thank you so much.